semper Virgo, Felix celi porta. Amen.
The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Matthew. The Pharisees went off and plotted how they might entrap Jesus in speech. They sent their disciples to him with the Herodians, saying, "Teacher, we know that you are a truthful man, and that you teach the way of God in accordance with the truth. And you are not concerned with anyone's opinion, for you do not regard a person's status. Tell us then, what is your opinion? Is it lawful to pay the census tax to Caesar or not?" Knowing their malice, Jesus said, "Why are you testing me, you hypocrites? Show me the coin that pays the census tax." Then they handed him the Roman coin. He said to them, "Whose image is this, and whose inscription?" They replied, "Caesar." At that he said to them, "Then repay to Caesar what belongs to Caesar, and to God what belongs to God." The Gospel of the Lord. The First Amendment of the Bill of Rights in part says, "Congress shall make no laws respecting an establishment of religion or of prohibiting the free exercise thereof." Today in our country, there are considerable disagreements, debates, and legal maneuvers, both by conservatives and liberals, about the intent of the framers of the Constitution when they wrote that amendment. A brief review of the writings of the framers indicates they indeed meant to separate church and state. At that time, the Baptist Association wrote to President Jefferson regarding a rumor that a particular Christian denomination would soon be recognized as the national denomination. Jefferson calmed their fears by reassuring them that the federal government would not establish a single denomination of Christianity as the nation's denomination. He wrote these famous words, "The First Amendment has erected a wall of separation between church and state." Further review indicates that both the Founding Fathers and the religious leaders of the day were primarily concerned that the federal government not establish a national church. Their main interest was a wall between church and state based on their concern that we would have the preservation of our religious freedom and protect our rights as individuals to believe and to practice as our conscience dictates. I believe what is important for us to understand is that the separation of church and state, as written by the founders, does not preclude any individual or group of citizens from publicly expressing religious observance. The only prohibition is that the government not be the sponsor or support religious observance. The real danger today is from those groups or individuals who would use this prohibition to crush any public expression of religion or to eliminate from society any reference or inclusion of religious thought or practice. But that was not the intent of the framers of the Constitution. As Catholics, we should support this position, for it ensures our freedom to freely practice our Catholic faith What we need to do is to fight the attempt by some people and groups in our society who want to eliminate the freedom of religious expression by individuals and non-government sponsors and groups in the community. Their aim is to remove from our society any notion that religion is a part of the fabric of our country. So what does this have to do with our Catholic faith as Americans? Today's gospel may suggest to some that living out our faith gives us a bit of wiggle room. Repay to Caesar what belongs to Caesar, and to God what belongs to God. Sounds like our lives can be divided into two boxes. One is the Caesar box, where we have our worldly concerns, the practical stuff of everyday life, especially our responsibility as citizens. The paying of our taxes, the obeying of local and national laws, and especially our responsibility to serve in the government or in the military and to support our states and national policies. This box seems to be the larger box to us because it takes up so much of our time and energy. It also has an influence over the decisions we make. What career should we choose? How should we invest our money? Where should we live? How much tax are we willing to pay? Where will we send our children to school? In the Caesar box, we may just shrug our shoulders sometimes when our taxes go to support national goals and policies that are opposed to our Catholic faith. But we are not the first people to experience this. First century Jews had to negotiate between the two worlds, secular and religious. They were an occupied people under Roman domination, and one reminder of the Roman pressure and presence in their lives was the requirement to pay taxes. Like us, they didn't like that choice that they had to make. Jewish tax collectors didn't help any because they collected taxes for the Romans. Nevertheless, the population relented to the tribute they had to dole out in support of a pagan army. Revolt, however, was not uncommon, but Roman suppression of that revolt and that resistance was brutal. The question put to Jesus then was not for the sake of a religious debate on some highfalutin religious issue. Rather, whether the census tax was paid or not was a daily issue for the Jewish people who believed in the same God we believe in and who did not want to divert their allegiance to a foreign nation that worshiped many gods and who's caused untold sufferings to the people who believed in the one true God. Matthew tells us in the Gospel that they had tried to set a trap for Jesus, but he detected the interrogators' devious intentions, and he asked them for a coin they used to pay the census tax. It was a denarii, and it had the image of the Emperor Tiberius on it. For many devout Jews, carrying Caesar's image, especially in the temple area where this image took place, was offensive and even blasphemous. So if Jesus had suggested they pay the tax, he would have alienated the devout. If, on the other hand, he advocated not paying the tax, the Romans would have sprung upon him for treason and stirring up an insurrection. In response, Jesus turns the challenge back on his adversaries He asked them for a coin that pays the census tax. For them and for us, Jesus' response forces a focus on the other box, the God box. The God box is not conveniently defined and set apart. Instead, what belongs to God for the devout Jewish listeners and for us who are Catholics is all-encompassing in our lives. There should be no part-time observance or a separation in our lives of this belongs to God and this belongs to Caesar. While we may have to do what the laws of the state require, Jesus is not advocating a mere submission to Caesar's realms. We are to be obedient to secular authority only when it is consistent with God's demands. Our obedience, our repaying to Caesar is relative, and we must always see our response to political dictates and the world's influence in the light of what belongs to God. Jesus taught us by his actions and his words that dedication to God's ways, submission to God's will, should be primary in our lives. Our allegiance to God must come first above all powers and loyalties. When our allegiance to God conflicts with an allegiance to other powers, then we must be obedient to God. For you see, it actually turns out that there is no wiggle room in our lives. There is no wiggle room, no part-time observance of what we are required to offer to God. As Catholics, we believe that our whole life, secular and spiritual, belongs to God. As Christian followers of Jesus Christ, we should live and work our lives under the form of government established by the Constitution, but we must conform to those structures only when they do not run counter to what Jesus has taught us is the holy life. It is God's will that all people be treated justly, that the poor be cared for, and everyone be treated with respect and as a child of God. And so when the government acts contrary to our basic beliefs, and we say and do nothing, then we have lost our way. Those of us who have been called to love God with our whole heart, with our whole soul, and with our whole mind, and our neighbor as ourself. God wants to work for the betterment of everyone in society, and we are to take into Caesar's world what we have long learned from Jesus Christ himself, to take everything from this world, Caesar's world, and bring it to God as an offering, good and holy. We need to decide where our ultimate loyalties lie. If they are with God, and not even Caesar should distract us from it. We cannot be a people with a divided heart who spends our time trying to separate out into two neat boxes what belongs to Caesar and what belongs to God. Instead, we should combine their contents and realize that God has given life to every being, especially those he made in his image and his likeness.
Salve Regina, Mater misericordiae, vita dulcedum, estes nostra salve. A te clamamus, exules filii in Eve, a te suspiramos. meamus, gebentes et ventes, in hac lacrimarum vale.